So the topic I'm talking about today is enabling students to become professionals. I've found that there's kind of a disconnect in education that doesn't really get people ready for the real world. And that is an octocat, not a catapus. Somebody asked me last night, and it is not a catapus. But so you guys know, I'm Donohoe. I am a software developer, and I've been, around the block, I guess, to say, in the development community. And I enjoy life. This is Lake Tahoe. I go up there as often as possible in the winter. I live in San Francisco, and I like surfing and riding my bike and snowboarding and brewing beer. Normal hacker stuff, I think. But this is just a beautiful day in Tahoe earlier this season. But I've been participating in open source since 2000. I stumbled upon Linux in 1999, and I was contributing to projects within a year because I found documentation needed help or little tweaks that did things that I wanted. And I strongly believe that finding open source early on opened up a lot of opportunities for me. Unlike a lot of my coworkers, I attended and graduated college. There's kind of this weird vibe going on where people don't think you need to go to college in order to get a degree, and that's very true, but I think that it's very useful. I work at a company called GitHub, which loves open source. We do our best to build the best collaborative tools for software developers that we possibly can. And a lot of my open source work and enjoying what I did led me to landing this job that is basically my dream job. But the talk is just about open source and students. And the majority of the college graduates that I meet aren't ready for the real world when it comes to software development. And today's talk's about enabling those students to be ready for real software jobs once they get out. And the only real way that I can kind of describe this to everybody is to kind of give you a little bit of background on what it was like for me. When I went to school, I was just excited. I was just like, I'm going to do all these great things. And I took 2 years off of school after high school and just kind of bummed around. And I went to a local college and I graduated in 4 years. And I had nothing to do with computers before that. I was just a kid that liked being outside and running around and riding his bike. And most of my classmates had been programming since they were teenagers. And it was weird because I came in and had no idea, and they were so far ahead of me, even in the early classes. And I attended the University of Memphis. I got an undergraduate CS degree, and it's a pretty small CS department. There were only about maybe 50 or 60 kids who graduated my year who got a CS degree. But there were some great educators there, some people who really took the time to help me develop as a developer. And they had a computer lab with like Microsoft products and all these weird things that, in order for me to do my assignments at my house, I basically had to go steal the software because there was no way I was going to pay $700 for a development environment. And then I discovered we had Linux boxes there. And I was like, oh, can I have Linux access? And they were like, graduates only, or graduate students only. And I was just like, this is so silly. Like, can I just have an account? And I ended up getting one. But it was just weird. There was all kinds of protocol that I basically needed to get used to because the real world's like that too. But I found this project called Enlightenment. And as I was learning Linux, the coolest thing you could do was make your desktop look amazing. It was just like, oh, you need to have these transparent terminals, and you need to have the coolest backgrounds and all these things. And Enlightenment was great because I wanted to tweak my desktop and learn a whole bunch of things. And at the same time, it was open source. So I got to see the changes rolling in, and I got to see the design discussions. And I got to learn about library management and release cycles and design discussions. And we were all really passionate about making pretty things. We wanted it to look amazing, and anything less than amazing was unsatisfactory. And we talked about that. And I feel like my formal education was complemented by this participation, because as I was going through school, I was learning the theory that they were teaching me, but in my free time, I was spending countless hours learning to hack C. They didn't even teach C in my school, but we wrote everything in C, so I had to learn that if I wanted to participate. And we did like crazy stuff. We hacked things. This is my niece and my brother-in-law. But there wasn't a good image viewer in Linux in like 2001. So I was like, well, I'm going to write an image viewer that I can show pictures of really neat things that we're making. And we built things we used. And so we were all friends. We built things we used. We were involved with the users of our software. So we talked to them. We weren't making things for someone behind a curtain that we never see. And we were all friends, and we helped each other whenever possible. But eventually, graduation came, and I stuck to my studies, and I hacked on open source, and I became a better developer. I'm not a great developer, but I'm, feel like I'm getting better every year. And I debated grad school, and I decided against it, mainly because of real-world stresses. I couldn't really bring myself to think about being broke for another 8 years. It was just, basically it came down to that. And I decided it was time to find a job. And I was naive, and I thought that, I have a CS degree, I have all this open source experience, and we're doing really technical stuff in this open source project, and I'm really passionate. I love programming. Like, someone will hire me. And I was in for a reality check, because there's this catch-22 in software development, because when you get out of college, everybody wants you to have like 4 years of practical experience with J2EE or something silly. And so you're really ready to go into the workforce, and no one will talk to you. And 6 to 7 years ago, open source didn't count for anything. Like, I could show people, look, I've written crazy stuff. We've written our own flat file database format that embeds crazy images and stuff, and people just don't care. It's like, we're sorry, we just can't put you into a position when you have no experience in the technology that we're talking about. And they just kind of look at you and pat you on the head, and they're like, good luck, buddy. And they basically tell you to take a hike. It's really unfortunate, because the experience that they want means professional experience, which is, sitting at a job, collecting a paycheck, and it really doesn't matter whether or not what you were doing is crap, but that's basically what they want. They want to know that you were somewhere and that you performed and people were basically happy with your work. But it's kind of crazy. And there's a lot of things that people are like, well, you just didn't do enough. It's like, well, actually, I tried really hard. I did independent studies. I went out of my way to work with the professors, and the professors there were amazing. They gave me a ton of opportunities, and I took 2 there with different researchers, and I got to learn a bunch. And in those experiences, I also realized that people in academia develop software very differently than everybody else. When it's purely academic, there aren't necessarily release cycles and things like that. It always felt like it was more driven towards releasing a paper and getting more grants, and not necessarily seeing what the real world was. And it's definitely, there's a huge disconnect there. But basically the employers didn't care that I had done independent studies, regardless of having these wonderful recommendations from these professors who were like, you should work with this guy, he's great. And people are like, well, you should be doing internships. If you did an internship, you probably could have turned that internship into a full-time job. But there aren't enough internships for all of the students. And it's extremely unfortunate, because what we're expecting people to do is, compete for these I guess, just these jobs or these internships that there aren't a lot of, and you expect that to be what lands people a job in the end. And I think that that's just not very nice. But one of the things that's interesting about internships is it starts to kick off reputation management. So what you have is the cred with the people that you interned with. Unfortunately, with the internships, you don't normally get to take your work that you did at the internship and show it to anybody. It's usually proprietary software that you can't say, you know what, you want to know about me or how I code? Here's the code, look at it. We're actually accepting intern applications at GitHub this summer, I'm just saying. But you can talk to me after if you're interested. But I was so frustrated, because like I loved doing this so much, and nobody cared. It was just like, I really want to land a job. And I started to wonder why I went to school at all. Because I had friends who bailed on school and got jobs. I had friends who never went to school and got jobs. And I worked my ass off, and I couldn't get one. And so I realized, like, I thought for the longest time it was like, maybe because I didn't go to an outstanding school that this was a problem. And then I talked to my friends who went to like Carnegie Mellon and stuff, and they're like, no, I got out of school and it took me about 2 years to figure out what was up. And I started to feel a little bit better about myself. But, I met so many people with similar experiences, and I found so many people who dropped out because they got an opportunity without the degree, and it was basically a fact that you know, if you can get in, you're pretty much good to go in technology because there's always a demand for people, and once you have experience, you can kind of like float along. And I felt like the only reason I graduated was to make my mom proud. You know, like it was basically, towards the end, it was extremely stressful, and I was just like, why am I doing this? I just want out. And in the end, it was just like, hey, I'm done, like, check. I did that thing that my parents had kind of expected me to do my whole life. And so I spent a depressing 3 or 4 months looking for work, and I basically got hired for a job that I didn't really enjoy, and I was underpaid and contracting for like a Fortune 5 company, and it was the normal like corporate ladder BS. And I did not find this fulfilling. I really thought that I would be able to work on something as exciting as that Enlightenment project that I'd worked on in school, and it was unfortunate because I couldn't. You know, I was basically doing work that drove me insane because I couldn't believe that other people didn't understand technology well enough to do things right. And so I figured I had to be missing something, you know, like what did I miss? Like I couldn't help but wonder why I worked so hard and found a job that was unsatisfying. And looking back, I think I understand that I realized what was necessary, but the job market didn't know that yet. And the job market hadn't really grown to adopt open source software. And I think it does now. And I think a lot of that missing piece can be achieved by participation, by getting involved in projects early on and doing, you know, basically starting to put your name out there. So teamwork.